One of the questions I get the most is, how do I analyze art? How do I appreciate art for myself? And I've always had a difficulty answering that question because, first, I don't think there's only one way to look at art, and second, I don't think you should rely on me to tell you how. However, I will answer the question here, and because I want to demonstrate the variety of ways you can look at and engage with art, I contacted some other YouTubers who analyze, appreciate, and break down art. I hope that after this video, you will feel inspired to look at art and find the most enjoyable and compelling way for you to analyze it. It can be daunting to analyze art, but by the end of this video, I hope to give you the confidence to do it and grow from it. As always, there's a live stream right after this video, and it's a lot of fun, so don't miss out on it. Oh, and there's also a Canvas Discord server, check it out in the description. The first question I want to tackle is looking at art difficult? And here are the answers I got.
You know what, I would say, like, if you want to know how to look at art, go and stand in a gallery for an hour, because people know how to do it. It's an instinct. We know how to look at art, or, the best thing to do is go around Paris for the day, and when it's a school day, and look at the kids and how they look at art, and they know how to look at art. We all know how to look at art, but we pretend we don't. It's people make such a big fuss. Sometimes I think it took you longer to write if you need to explain art, then it's not art on my channel, than it does to Google something about, it's like, it's not that difficult. Yeah. Art is less difficult than you think.
I think my gut answer, my like hot take answer, is that it's hard. That it's something I spend a lot of time doing. It's something I work at, and engaging with the ideas. I like give myself discipline. I mean, we both do, right? We set ourselves deadlines, and we try to learn a thing in time to speak articulately about it. Yeah, I do find it hard, like, to give myself I don't know how to explain this, but like the discipline that we have to teach ourselves how to do this, and to look at art, and to keep on practicing, and to build up that visual vocabulary. It takes time. It sometimes takes reading boring books. But I don't know, the value is so great.
I was super happy to get two different answers to that question, and to be clear, I don't believe they necessarily contradict each other. I agree with both creators because of the following distinction, and this might be your first lesson in learning to look at art. To put it simply, there are aesthetics and cognition. You may disagree with this distinction, but I think it can help reconcile both of the perspectives I showed. There's a pleasure and a value in looking at art for what it looks like. There's also a pleasure and a value in looking at art with its context, its ideas, and its thought-provoking questions. An artwork can have only one of these two aspects, or it can have both. I'd argue that we can use instincts to appreciate a work of art for its aesthetics, for how it looks, and how it can grasp us emotionally. However, the difficulty of looking at a work of art can come in understanding its message, ideas, or concept through its context. Personally, I find more pleasure in looking at art through its context and by understanding its ideas, as I find that to be the most challenging and allows potentially for more growth. Can you be wrong when looking at a work of art? I feel like this might be where many people get intimidated by the idea of engaging with art. There's a fear of failure, of not understanding a work of art, which is probably at the root of the many messages and comments I get asking me how to look at art.
I've spent my whole life around art. I've worked for the highest end galleries. I studied fine art at college. I became an artist. I was the worst artist in the world, and I've kind of done it all. And it's and I still don't understand what's going on. I think it's people quite often ask me, what do I like about art? What kind of work do I like? I hate people say, what's your favorite? Because, that's, you can't do that. But I think, I went to see some work this weekend, and I know that the work that interests me the most is work that I don't understand. That is it. If I don't understand what's going on, like when people scratch their heads and say, what is this? What is Jackson Pollock's like? That's a really good thing. it's really good to not understand. It's okay.
Additionally, I think that there's something interesting about using like being aware of your own visual habits, your own visual vocabulary, and your own visual habits when you're looking at a painting, even if it's completely inappropriate. Like there's a Botticelli painting that is of the Annunciation, and if you don't know, like if you don't have the Christian iconography in your head, and you don't know that that's Gabriel telling Mary that she's pregnant, but you know college football really well, then it looks like Gabriel is doing the Heisman pose and is like threatening to tackle Mary, who's like a little bit scared and is pulling back a little bit. And just like knowing that you've got that Heisman Trophy vocabulary in your head, and that impacts the way that you're seeing that image, that is part of the referendum on how we see, and it's part of our visual vocabulary, and it's our visual vocabulary interacting with Botticelli's. And there's like an interesting conversation we have there. You're not discovering any secrets of that painting, but it becomes like, what about, like, how is it socially so ingrained in our visual habits that we see this thing in a completely inappropriate space?
The reason why people are intimidated by like art analysis or art interpretation or art engagement, I feel like it's because they might be afraid of being wrong in a way, or not having that visual culture, those visual references. But what you're saying is, even if you're looking at the Annunciation through football, American football, like there's still a value in there, because it might not say that much about the Annunciation in itself, but it's saying something about you and the way you're looking at art, and that in itself is a form of engagement. So I think if I'm extrapolating that, it's also like interpret artworks as you wish, and do and try to find value in those interpretations, whatever those interpretations may be, right?
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly what I'm trying to say is, find value in being aware, like, because so many of our biases come from the way that we look at things uncritically, and we just like have our visual habits, and we have our biases, and we're going to see things in places that aren't necessarily there. And the more that you can look at art and become aware of like how you see, and be more intentional with the way that you see, and like the way that you can learn about yourself through looking at art, I think is really valuable. So, right, I think so long as you're building authentic relationships with the world through the symbols that art gives you, like you're winning. Like, you're not wrong. You're doing it right.
So what we got so far is that you can look at art through its context, or perhaps more instinctively, and that it's okay and even good to not understand an artwork. And even if you take a shot at an analysis and you're wrong, that analysis and that engagement with the work of art in itself has value, because it can lead you to be critical about your way of seeing. To look at works of art, you simply need to do it. James Payne from Great Art Explains says to look at art and let your instincts carry you through the experience. James Earl from Emulsiendi says to practice, and with time, this practice will help you develop a visual language and an eye for art. So you're not afraid of looking at art anymore. That's great. You're ready to go to your closest museum and do what exactly? James from Emulsiendi compared the museum to a church, in the sense that the context in itself gives value to the artworks inside the establishment. I think a museum is a great way to initiate yourself to art, because just through the fact that artworks are framed and hung in a prestigious building, this leads you to give more importance, and therefore encourages you to engage more with these artworks. So I asked our creators, how do they look at art in a museum or gallery?
I think for me, I'm like most people. It's a visual thing. So it's what appeals to me visually. So I would quite often say to people that if you get a group of 50 people together, then more often than not they will gravitate towards the great art. More often than not, and there's a reason for that. It's sometimes it's visual, sometimes it's color. Lots of different reasons, but I think for me, I approach it as I think most people do, from a visual angle first of all. I would say that, and then does it affect me emotionally is very important to me as well, as to what reaction I get. And by emotional, I don't mean that in a good sense. It can be anger as well. I quite often get angry about art. And I think that's a good thing. It's good to get angry about art or have any kind of emotion, really. So indifference is the worst thing you can have in art, I think. The next thing I look at is the label. So I love labels in galleries, and I find it just, one thing is the date. I look at the date and then the country. So I look at where it's from, where the artist is from, and then I start thinking about the history from that period. So I quite often look at history before I think about the mechanics of an artwork. And then sometimes the name is it interests me, whether it's a man or a woman. Sometimes not so much, really. If it's a painting from 1700s and I realize it's by a woman, then I start to look at it in a different way. But generally, it's the date it's from. I start thinking about why they would have done something, and I think those are the first two things I do. They're the first important things: is whether it hits me straight away, and whether and what I think the history surrounding it is. And then after that, I feel like I relax a little bit, and then kind of let the artist lead me around the painting. Most art is designed to make you look at it in a certain way, and whether you're someone who's never seen art before or someone who's an art historian, the artist is playing with you, so that they want you to look at it in a certain way. So then I start to think about how I should look at it, and they have a plan for you. You're really not much in control when you're looking at art, really. So, which I find very, very interesting. And then I start thinking about how scale affects me. Scale is really important to me as well. Big giant work like Jericho, compared to tiny little pieces, affect you in different ways, and it's how I need to stand when I look at that. Those are the other things. And then I start getting up close. What techniques are being used. The technical stuff is always the last bit for me. It's always unless it's an artist like Cézanne, where I'm really looking at brushstrokes mean a lot to me, in that sense. So are the brushstrokes smooth? Are they rough? Is there a reason for this? Are they visible? Did the artist want you to see the brushstrokes or not want you to see them? Because artists know what they're doing. And then how do all those things connect? I'd say the last thing I think about is what message they're trying to get across. I have to think. I think, what message are they trying to get across, and is that their intention? The message I'm getting, which are quite often two very different things. And I think I find that super interesting as to what they want me to see and what I'm actually seeing. And that's about it. I think. I saw some work this week. I actually saw a Goya this week, the Black Goya, the Black Maha, which is on loan from America, and I hadn't seen it in real life before. And I just started thinking, how do I react to it differently from having seen it many, many times in a book? And in that sense, the scale was important. Life-size scale is super important. And then the other thing was how it was painted, because I knew a lot about that painting already. So I started to think about how it was painted.
My background is in Renaissance art, so I feel like most of my visual vocabulary comes from that tradition, like early modern European traditions. So my default setting is to like look for those kinds of things. It's not even that this is an ambition. It's not even like I go in there and I say like, okay, how do I understand this thing? Let me see what tools I have in my toolbox, and I find a bunch of Renaissance iconography in my toolbox, and then I apply them to the painting. That's not the way that it goes. It's more that I'll just see compositions that like if I see triangle compositions, I just have a reference in my head for Renaissance type paintings that would have a triangle composition, like Madonna and Childs, or lamentation paintings, or these kinds of things. And so I just start like applying this sort of visual vocabulary that I have towards the paintings. And like saint iconography, stuff like this, I just come from this Western Renaissance tradition. But most of the paintings I look at these days are not in that Western Renaissance tradition. Mostly I deal with contemporary art. It's been actually a long time since I've written an original script on a Renaissance painting. So one thing for me when I'm looking at a new work of art is I want to engage with people about it. Like for me, it's not a solo project. I want to like discuss it and come up with ideas. Like art is always a foundation for me to have deeper conversations with somebody else. Like one thing I really love about art is that it knocks me, especially like a new piece of art, that artwork that I haven't seen before, it knocks me off balance. It like knocks me off my usual script. So like if you were to ask me about I don't know, Ted Lasso or something, like a show that's on TV, I pretty much have my script for how I respond to that in, at the dinner table or at the lunch table at school. But when I see like a work by Kara Walker or Annika Yee, and it's like something completely new, I'm forced to respond to that authentically as me. Like there's no rehearsal to it. And that is going to introduce me to new ideas, and I'm going to then have different kinds of conversations than I would. And so like the artwork is a foundation for me to build relationships in the world, in the physical world. And that's not just like with talking either. It's also with the research that I do when I get interested in a work of art, that I feel like I'm participating in a conversation with a bunch of people who are writing about that work of art or reviewing that work of art or that show or whatever. And so it can be this like conversation that's happening asynchronously across time and space, across, like I'm participating in conversations with art theorists from the 18th century or sometimes. And I find that that's like the most rewarding part of looking at art for the first time. And that's a big part of my process. Like for me, it's a social experience.
Many people might feel it daunting when they're confronted with a work of art that might have a lot of history, but they don't know it. And it's like, it could be anything, right? Let's say it's even the Raft of the Medusa. If you don't know anything about the Raft of the Medusa and then you're confronted with it, you're like, I know to fully appreciate it, I need to watch Great Art Explained talking, right? But it's like you can't do that. Like you can't watch a 10 to 15 minute video every time you're about to watch a painting, right? So how do you reconcile this need that I feel like we're responding to, which is having this more in-depth context? So like, do you see the kind of contradiction in the sense that
I really shy away from actually explaining art, really, to be honest. It's kind of like, I don't think it's my job to tell people how to feel about a certain work. My job is really, for my channel anyway, it's about providing context. That's really what it's for. I think that, you can, if you see, let's go back to the Raft of the Medusa. You just have to stand in the Louvre in front of that painting for half an hour and see people's reaction to it. And I think that's what Jericho wanted, the reaction he's getting, which is, that's a bloody big painting. That's a really huge painting. Oh my God, there's lots of violence in it. It's really, bloody, and there's a lot of fear and anger in it. I think the painting does its job already, and I think my job with the case of that particular video, is to provide further context. It's I always feel it's like I've Catcher in the Rye is one of my favorite books, and I've read that book dozens of times. But when I started learning more about the context behind it, it made it more interesting, but it didn't make it a better book. I'm not trying to make people like paintings more, because a lot of people are never going to like Rothko, so it's like you're just fighting a losing battle. But it's about I think the paintings work on their own. You don't need to have context, but sometimes context really helps.
If you go to a museum, is it better to do the research before or after? Would you tell someone, like, let's say someone's like, it's my first time, like a student, let's say, first time in a gallery,
Yeah.
I'm going to a show, and they're like, all right, I don't know where to go. Should I go on the museums? Like, because you also might be overwhelmed by all
Right.
of it, right? Because like,
Yeah.
how many paintings are you going to be looking at, and how much research are you going to need to do in order to be satisfied with, all right, now I can go, right? That's what I'm
Yeah.
asking. Like, would you tell them to look
Yeah.
at art, or maybe just select a few paintings and do the research
So
there? Or
yeah. In math education, there's this concept by this math teacher called Dan Mayer called a 3-act math problem. And I think that I would use this structure if a student was like, I've never been to a museum. What do I do? Permanent collection, you know what's going to be there. Should I look at it first, or should I like get inspired by something and then look at it? I think I would say act 1. Like if I know, for example, like there's going to be a bunch of Bruegel paintings. Act 1, pick one Bruegel painting, learn about that one Bruegel painting before you go. Then when you go there, act 2 is find another Bruegel painting and like take the lessons that you learned about, the way that he does his compositions and the kinds of characters he has and the kinds of stories he has, and see if you can like engage with one you've never seen before meaningfully, and like let that be the extension. So like act 1, learn. Act 2, see the painting that you saw in person, engage with it, and then act 3, like extend that and see if you can take the habits that you learned, be aware of those habits, and then look at other things with those habits.
in my case, I've learned about history and about art history in the past few years, so that obviously informs how I look at works of art. My biases, as you may know, also inform how I look at art and how I interpret it. In a museum, however, I like to go without necessarily knowing the context of the artworks I'm about to view, not only because there are usually too many artworks to have the proper context for each of them, but because when I went to museums, I like to put myself through some kind of enlightenment. I looked at art I knew nothing about and that I felt attracted to, sometimes because of its monumentality, sometimes for the ideas I thought it might depict, and sometimes out of instinct. I do my best at appreciating these works of art, and I take pictures of the label in order to complete my appreciation at home. Going into like looking at art without knowing anything about it and thinking, all right, I'm appreciating it. All right, now I get it, right? And then going back home, doing the research and realizing, okay, I didn't get it at all. But like, it's like, but this like going from I get it to, oh my God, it's actually so much cooler than I thought it was.
Yeah.
I feel like it takes you from like the darkness of ignorance to, at least for that painting in particular, and I like that process, right? Of going like, oh, like it's hitting you in the face, right? Through that research afterwards. So I don't know.
It's like validating in a way where you like something out in the world, like you're inspired to learn about it, and then you find out that it's like actually cool, and you're like, whoa, my instincts were really good. So you're really validated.
Yeah. Or they were bad, but in a good way, because like, oh, it turns out it was cooler, but for some complete other reason.
You're right.
Yeah. I had that experience with a couple of paintings. One of them was Leon Golub. It's like, oh, this painting is called Mercenaries, and it's like with it looks really cool. It's really like dark and gritty. I really like it. But then you go home, it's like, oh, it's about the Vietnam War, and it's about the violence of the United States and during all those little bits that I got and that I was satisfied with are tying together to make like an actual something powerful. And I feel like it's like,
and they
so
introduced you to a story that you didn't know before, and that that's exactly what I'm talking about with how it like helps you build a relationship with the world and help you build a relationship with knowledge that wasn't there before.
And perhaps my best tip is to look at art and then do the research at home, even if it's just a Wikipedia article, and see how this research changes the way you appreciate that work of art and the way you engage with the world through that work of art. As James from Great Art Explains says, Art sometimes needs context, sometimes it doesn't, so you might have to figure out for yourself if that work of art needed context and your research in the first place. Or, as James from Amorsiendi says, through your research, you'll engage in a larger conversation about that artwork, which is, in itself, powerful. And this is for artworks you see in museums or galleries. However, out of all the artworks I made videos on, I only saw one in real life. You might not need museums if you have the internet. You can still look at art, engage with art, analyze the way you look at art, understand the context in which artworks were made, and see how that influences your way of looking at art. You already engage with art by watching my videos. You can definitely do it on your own. You can do it the way I like doing it, or the way Amorsiendi or Great Art Explains does, or you can develop your own way as well if you feel like it makes you grow more. Don't be afraid of looking at art, or don't be afraid of being wrong. Nobody's grading you, and you're not looking at art for anyone other than yourself. If you're unsatisfied with your interaction with a work of art, you can either learn from that, or it might also be that the artist is just not your type, and that's also fine. Go look at art, and if you still don't know how, do it by instinct and build your way of doing it through practice and experience. You have nothing to lose. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for liking and subscribing if you have already. And I'd like to thank, as always, Rowan Brandel, Mike Wex, Russell Chinchilla, and every other patron for supporting the channel. If you also want to support the channel, check out patreon.com/thecanvas. Thank you.